If the video touches your heart, give it a like, and if you are new to this channel, please stay tuned by subscribing the channel. Thanks everyone. I have never been fishing, but I have been fish watching. It is important to remember that beauty is the only thing that time cannot harm. Philosophies fall away like sand, creeds follow one another, but what is beautiful is a joy for all seasons, a possession for all eternity. I asked them to take a poem and hold it up to the light, like a color slide, or press an ear against its hive. If the poem has a surprise in it, if it leaps suddenly and unexpectedly in a new direction, then I'm very happy. The trouble with poetry is that it encourages the writing of more poetry. We breathe briefly, and then we die. I have nothing against happiness. It's just that I'm not hardwired for it. To write a poem, you have to be both the father and the mother of what you write. You have to bring everything to it. Poetry is the art of creating imaginary gardens with real toads. I am drawn to the imperfections of memory, to its random beauty. All babies are born with a knowledge of poetry because the lube-dub of the mother's heart is in iambic meter. Rhyme is probably generated by the baby's brainwaves, the sound of the brain working. I think of poems as stubborn children who refuse to go to bed. When the lights go out, we're all the same size. The trouble with poetry is that it's either a love affair or a quarrel with language. Poetry is the only art where you can write the same thing over and over again, and it can be different every time. If the moon smiled, she would resemble you. You leave the same impression of something beautiful, but annihilating. Poetry is the chiseled marble of language. It's a paint-spattered canvas, but the poet uses words instead of paint, and the canvas is you. What I love about poetry is that it is not reducible to truth. I am not interested in giving people solace or comfort. That's not what poetry is about. Poetry is the art of noticing what you notice. Writing is a way of talking without being interrupted. If I could write like anyone in the world, it would be Raymond Carver. Poetry is a kind of shorthand. It's a way of getting at what's essential. The best poetry is the poetry that makes you feel more alive. I am suspicious of any poet who tells you what their poems mean. I write to give myself strength. I write to be the characters that I am not. I write to explore all the things I'm afraid of. I like to think of poetry as a living thing, like a plant or an animal. I am the dog you put to sleep, as you like to call, the needle of oblivion, come back to tell you this simple thing: I never liked you. Poetry is like a bird, it ignores all frontiers. I like to think of poetry as a tree with many branches. A good poem is like a good meal, it should satisfy all the senses. I believe that the best poetry is a kind of singing. I like poems that are quiet and reflective. To write a good poem, you have to be willing to be vulnerable. Poetry is a way of taking life by the throat. A good poem is a surprise to the reader, but not to the writer. The best poems are like good jokes, they have a punchline. I like to think of poetry as a conversation between the poet and the reader. Poetry is a way of looking at the world. The best poems are those that leave something unsaid. A good poem is like a puzzle, it's up to the reader to put the pieces together. I write poetry to make sense of the world. The best poems are those that surprise even the poet. I like to think of poetry as a way of seeing. The trouble with poetry is that it can be both beautiful and meaningless at the same time. A good poem is like a mirror, it reflects the reader back to themselves. I like to think of poetry as a way of expressing the inexpressible. The best poems are those that change the way you see the world. Poetry is a way of bringing order to chaos. Thank you very much for watching the video till the end.